Hey guys, tonight we drift back to a time of ruffled collars, wooden stages, and audiences rowdier than a modern-day football crowd after 4 pints. You're standing at the edge of the Globe Theatre in London. Yes, that Globe. The air thick with the scent of roasted chestnuts, damp wool, and the subtle threat of something squishy sailing your way. Lanterns flicker. The crowd murmurs. Somewhere behind you, someone hawks a tomato with a little too much enthusiasm. It's the late 1500s, and you've somehow found yourself among the Elizabethans. You're not royalty, not nobility, not even one of the relatively well-behaved gentlefolk in the gallery. Nope, you're in the pit, shoulder to shoulder with commoners who paid a penny to stand for 3 hours. And frankly, they want their money's worth. There's excitement in the air, but also tension. Because if the actors stink tonight, they're not walking off stage with just bad reviews. They might be walking off dripping in juice. And honestly, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're tuning in from, and what time it is for you right now. Always curious who's drifting off where. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The Globe isn't as glamorous as history books like to pretend. There's no red velvet, no mood lighting, and certainly no miniature box of overpriced snacks. You're standing, yes, standing, in a mud-packed courtyard, surrounded by other viewers all crammed under an open sky. There are no toilets, so you're hoping no one gets too excited during the second act. The wooden stage juts out like a dock into your part of the yard, and every flub line lands like a pebble in the sea of elbows and opinions. You glance up. The balconies above you creak with the weight of the wealthier patrons, their perfumes wafting down and mixing questionably with the odors of humanity and half-digested mutton. The vibe is lively, chaotic, and vaguely threatening. Think Renaissance Coachella, but with fewer flower crowns and more public vomiting. The performance starts. A trumpet blares. The crowd hushes-ish, and then it begins. A tale of love, betrayal, mistaken identity, and, depending on tonight's script, possibly a ghost or two. The actors are committed. Their gestures are grand. Their words are rhythmic, poetic, and mostly comprehensible if you squint your brain hard enough. But you notice something odd. One of the actors keeps nervously glancing to the side of the stage. Another seems to flinch at the slightest sound from the crowd. You tilt your head. What could possibly spook someone who regularly recites death monologues while wearing tights in front of several hundred strangers? Then you see it, a woman in the front row clutching a small basket. A red, glistening ore peeks out. She smiles ominously. Oh no, it's tomato time. Here's the thing. Elizabethan actors didn't just fear bad reviews. They feared the fruits of the audience's discontent. Tomatoes weren't just salad ingredients back then. They were statements, projectiles, public commentary. And unlike modern Yelp critiques, they hurt, especially when hurled by someone who's been fermenting both their attitude and their lunch under the sun all afternoon. Now, historians still argue whether audiences actually chucked tomatoes in Shakespeare's day. Some say it's a myth cooked up later. Tomatoes were relatively new to Europe and considered suspicious, even poisonous. But what's true is that Elizabethan audiences did throw things, rotten fruit, nutshells, sharp insults. And tomatoes eventually joined the mix once people figured out they weren't deadly, at least not in the literal sense. Let's be honest, anything squishy and throwable became fair game when boredom struck. And given the length of some plays, looking at you, 5-act tragedies, you start to understand why. The tomatoes themselves had a reputation problem, originating in the Americas. They were brought to Europe by explorers and immediately got tangled in a web of botanical confusion. Some thought they were related to deadly nightshade. Others thought they were an aphrodisiac. Some just thought they looked rude. It didn't help that they were often served on pewter plates, which leach led into the acidic juice, causing symptoms that looked suspiciously like poisoning. Tomatoes kill, people whispered. But honestly, the plates were the real villains. Still, superstition dies hard. Tomatoes became an odd culinary pariah in elite circles, but among common folk, they were cheap, red, and satisfying to hurl at someone who just flubbed a soliloquy. You feel a thud beside your foot. A tomato hits the dirt, splattering your ankle. The actor on stage swallows hard and powers through the scene. You wonder briefly if he rehearsed with a tomato in each pocket, just to mentally prepare. The woman beside you cackles and readies another. The man in front of you mutters about how last week's performance had 2 ghosts and 3 sword fights. This one's all talk, he grumbles. And just like that, you start to see how difficult it was to keep your dignity and your doublet clean in the face of this chaotic live feedback system. Elizabethan actors weren't just performers. They were survivalists. They memorized monologues, dodged vegetables, and navigate a crowd that could turn from rapt silence to food fight in under 10 seconds. Oddly enough, this unpredictability gave the theater a raw, electric energy. You never quite knew what you were walking into, and neither did the actors. Each night was an adventure, an emotional gamble, and possibly a mild concussion. Of course, not everyone was against the players. Many came to genuinely enjoy the performances. But the bad apples and the bad tomatoes always made the biggest impact. Literally, you glance back at the woman's basket. Empty. A good sign. For now. But if the next act drags, someone's definitely getting sauced. The crowd shifts, murmurs rising like steam from damp cobblestones, and you shuffle a little to the left. Try not to step in what might be part of last night's performance. Or someone's lunch. The play continues, but your attention is pulled in 2 directions, the onstage drama and the offstage comedy of Elizabethan theater culture. It's not just actors fearing tomatoes. It's a whole production tiptoeing between brilliance and complete disaster, one line and one launch at a time. Let's zoom out a bit. You're in the golden age of English drama, the time of Marlowe, Johnson, and of course, Shakespeare. And despite the prestige those names carry now, you should know this. Live theater in 16th century London was more of a raucous social experiment than a highbrow cultural moment. It was loud, it was bawdy, and it absolutely reeked. Theaters were built outside city walls to dodge the moral police, literally. Puritans in the city council hated the playhouses, calling them hotbeds of sin and filth, which, to be fair, wasn't entirely wrong. With pickpockets prowling the yard, vendors shouting for sales mid-scene, and occasional outbreaks of plague forcing complete closures, it wasn't exactly Broadway, but it was magnetic. 1,000 people packed into the Globe for a single performance. That's like every neighbor you've ever avoided at the grocery store, all standing shoulder to shoulder, watching a guy in tights talk to a skull. Now, think of the logistics. No microphones, no lighting rigs, no comfy seats with cup holders. Actors had to project over chaos, shouting lines so forcefully that the veins on their necks probably had their own understudies. They wore heavy costumes, often hand-me-down from noble households, and makeup that included white lead powder, which, yes, slowly poisoned them over time. Beauty is pain, and in this case, neurotoxic. But still, they showed up. They rehearsed endlessly. They memorized verse so dense it could bruise a tomato just by existing. And they performed through rain, rowdiness, and the ever-present threat of getting pelted by garden produce. Actors learned tricks. They exaggerated their gestures, tossing arms wide enough to dodge rotten fruit by sheer movement. They made eye contact with loud hecklers, calling them out mid-scene. Shakespeare even wrote those moments in sometimes, just to keep the energy up. You, standing there among the crowd, get the sense that performance here is equal parts art and gladiator sport. Historians still argue whether actors ever responded to being hit mid-performance. Did they break character? Dodge gracefully? Yell back in iambic pentameter? Some accounts hint that seasoned players developed routines for such occasions, weaving humiliation into the scene to keep things moving. One tale speaks of a particularly agile Hamlet who snatched a flying apple out of the air, took a bite, and delivered to be or not to be, while chewing defiantly. Probably apocryphal, but honestly, you'd pay extra to see that. Let's talk more about those tomatoes. They weren't cheap, which makes their use as ammo even weirder. You'd think people would save their fresh produce, not weaponize it. But tomatoes held this curious place in the Elizabethan imagination. Foreign, fleshy, suspicious. Introduced via trade from the New World, they were first grown ornamentally, not eaten, just looked at like botanical Instagram models. It wasn't until the 1700s that tomatoes became a regular menu item in England, but even by the late 1500s, some bold, or very hungry, souls tried them. Most survived. A few didn't, especially if they ate them off those cursed pewter plates again. But their association with mystery and danger lingered, which made them perfect for theatrical protest. You imagine the poor actor stepping on stage, spotting someone in the pit cradling one of those glistening, pulpy time bombs. Their palms sweat. Their voice cracks. Every word is a gamble. And somewhere in the back row, a guy's quietly unpacking a picnic basket, like it's ammo prep. In a world where applause was rare and rotten food was frequent, actors had to develop thick skins, emotionally and sometimes literally. It said that some added stiff padding under their doublets, not for warmth, but for impact resistance. Tomato armor. Imagine going to your gig every day wondering if you'll need to dodge a citrus-flavored uppercut. Not that the tomato was always the villain. Some food historians suggest that in a pinch, they also doubled as snacks for the audience. Watching a 3-hour tragicomedy without snacks is brutal, so it tracks that people would bring finger food, fruit, nuts, small pies. The fact that those same snacks could be reclassified as ballistic weapons at any moment is just peak Elizabethan chaos. You see it now, don't you? The sweaty actor on stage, reciting his heart out while side-eyeing someone gnawing a pomegranate like it's a loaded musket. And the moment that actor stumbles or forgets a line, wham! Suddenly he's wearing fruit salad. Even Shakespeare, you suspect, wrote with a threat of projectiles in mind. His plays move fast. There's always a joke, a fight, a ghost, or a cross-dressing twist to keep the audience awake. Too many monologues in a row? That's when the air starts buzzing. That's when the tomatoes take flight. And yet, people kept coming. Actors kept acting. Tomatoes kept splatting. Somehow it all worked. You glance at the stage again. Tonight's cast has found its rhythm. The crowd is unusually quiet, captivated. No squishing noises. No flying fruit. For now, it's safe. But you've learned your lesson. If you ever time travel back to 1590s London again, don't bring a cushion. Bring a rain poncho. Red and chunky might not just describe the soup. You smell it before you see it. The faint iron tang of blood, mixed with the warm sourness of unwashed humanity, drenched wool, and something unmistakably fishy. Welcome backstage in an Elizabethan playhouse, where glamour is a myth and hygiene is an afterthought. You duck under a sagging bit of canvas, step over a discarded ruff, and suddenly you're in the inner sanctum, where actors whisper lines, costumes hang limp on pegs, and somewhere a man named Jeffrey is coating his face in white paste with all the delicacy of frosting a pie. Backstage in this era is more war tent than dressing room. The air is thick with dust, the floor sticky with spilled ale, and a little something else you don't want to investigate. And through it all, noise. Constant chaotic, overlapping noise. Actors mutter sonnets under their breath. Musicians tune their lutes. Someone sneezes violently into a prop skull. And above it all, a harried stage manager named Will, or maybe Roger, yells about missing wigs and broken swords. In this mess, it's easy to forget how serious the stakes are. Theater wasn't a hobby in Elizabethan London. It was livelihood. For the actors, it was also a delicate dance of ego, danger, and social status. They could rise to celebrity heights or plunge into obscurity, all in the span of a single performance or projectile. The acting companies were tight-knit and hierarchical. At the top, the sharers, actor managers who owned a piece of the company and split the profits. Below them, hired men, apprentices, and a few scurrying boys in increasingly threadbare dresses. That's right, women were banned from the stage. So teenage boys were tasked with playing every Juliet, Ophelia, or Lady Macbeth. It wasn't weird then. Well, okay, it was a little weird then, too. These boys were expected to learn every part, master subtle femininity, and weep convincingly, all while dodging tomatoes like the rest. And remember, Elizabethan tomatoes weren't the soft, overripe kind. These things were firm, like crack a window firm. Getting hit mid-soliloquy could chip a tooth. Historians still argue whether these boy actors were admired or pitted. Some earned fame, others faded fast. Many had their voices break mid-season and were booted into minor roles or backstage work. Imagine being 14, playing Desdemona, and waking up one day sounding like a foghorn. Backstage wasn't just cramped. It was dangerous. Prop weapons were often real weapons dulled just enough. Trapdoors creaked ominously. One poorly timed exit to the wrong curtain could land you in the arms of a jealous rival, a misfired cue, or worse, a round of booing. Theaters used live flame for lighting. That meant torches, open torches, near heavy velvet drapes and wooden platforms. And did I mention the powdered wigs? You eye a rack of costumes now. They smell like mothballs and ambition. These weren't cheap knockoffs, either. Many were stolen or borrowed from noble households. Silks, velvets, embroidered tunics worth more than some audience members made in a year. The actors rarely owned them. They were communal, swapped and repurposed for every show. One day you're King Lear, the next you're a serving maid. Same robe, different sobbing. And the makeup. Oh, the makeup. White lead to pale the skin, vermilion for lips, soot or burnt cork for dramatic eyeliner. Effective, theatrical, and about as healthy as licking a battery. Actors layered on thick, often reapplying between scenes with no mirror, just touch and muscle memory. One wrong stroke, and your less tragic hero, more haunted turnip. You hear a muffled thud, a chair collapsing offstage. No one reacts. This is normal. You follow a narrow passage that leads to a trapdoor and peek through. On stage, the play rages on. An actor delivers his lines with gusto, while eyeing the upper gallery nervously. The hecklers up there are notoriously unpredictable, known to throw not only tomatoes but also coins, oranges, or in one memorable incident, a dead rat tied to a string. Fringe tidbit. That rat is still talked about today among scholars of Elizabethan drama. The great vermin toss of 1594, some call it. There's a kind of intimacy to it all. These actors live in each other's pockets, rehearsing, performing, eating, even sleeping in the same spaces. No dressing rooms, no private trailers. You curl up behind a stack of props and imagine it's the end of a long day. Your costume itches. Your head is still ringing from that thrown turnip. But you survived. The show went on. Barely. The camaraderie backstage is fierce. Rivalries happen, sure. There's always one guy who insists on upstaging everyone. But mostly, there's solidarity. Shared glances before a risky sword fight. Shoulder pats before the crowd turns rowdy. Silent prayers that the boy playing Juliet doesn't trip over his own shoes again. One oddity catches your eye. A bucket of raw eggs tucked near a pile of swords. Not for eating. Definitely not for throwing. Those are banned by company rule. No, this is a warm-up ritual. Some actors crack one and swallow a whole before going on stage. Swearing it helps with voice control. Fringe science meets desperation. Historians still argue whether this was superstition, tradition, or just protein loading. Probably all three. And when you're about to fake your own death for the 15th time this month, who cares? You'll do whatever it takes. And when the curtain, or rather, the symbolic lack of curtain, falls, the actors don't vanish. They mingle with the crowd. Bow, grin. Sometimes flee depending on the show's reception. There's no stage door to slip out of quietly. You walk through the audience, still in costume, hoping no one recognizes you as the guy who flubbed Macbeth's dagger speech. The sun dips low. The crowd thins. You feel the day catch up to you like a slow fog. Backstage grows quiet. One actor hums softly as he peels off a wig. Another mends a tunic by candlelight. And someone somewhere is still muttering, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, as if the lines might protect him from whatever tomorrow actually brings. It won't, but you say it anyway. Because here, on this rickety stage with its tomatoes and ghosts and blood-red curtains, it's not about surviving gracefully. It's about surviving it all. You wake up to the smell of damp straw, stale ale, and something suspiciously like mildew-soaked velvet. No, you're not in a dungeon. You're still backstage. Morning has broken over London, and the theater isn't so much sleeping as it is wheezing gently under the weight of last night's performance. The ground is strewn with broken props, bruised fruit, and one extremely dramatic shoe. No one knows whose it is. No one asks. As you rise and stretch, carefully, because your back still hurts from that impromptu nap on a rolled-up tapestry, you begin to appreciate just how many of the actors actually live here. Some sleep in the rafters, others squeeze into prop trunks. There's even one guy who strung a hammock across 2 scaffolds. Bold, really. Theaters weren't just workplaces in Elizabethan times. For many actors, they were home, hostel, gym, and borderline prison. Once you joined a troupe, it became your whole world. There weren't glamorous country estates or winter sabbaticals. You were where the shows were, and that meant staying close. Sometimes uncomfortably close. Historians still argue whether these makeshift accommodations were due to financial necessity or the tight-knit nature of the acting troupes. Probably both. After all, actors weren't the wealthiest class. They were slightly above chimney sweeps, but significantly below, say, moderately successful fishmongers. You wander toward the edge of the stage, brushing aside a few feathers from a tragically overplucked costume. Outside, the city stirs. Street vendors hawk pies and questionable oysters. The Thames glistens under a cloudy sky. And somewhere, an apprentice actor is already shouting lines at pigeons, convinced of a good rehearsal technique. In daylight, the theater feels different. It's less magical, more creaky. You notice the gaps between the planks, the stains that might be wine, or let's just say not wine, the ropes that raise the makeshift heavens above the stage groan when touched. It's like peeking behind the curtain of a magic trick and realizing the magician's top hat is just a painted bucket. But the audience doesn't see this part. They only see the illusion. And keeping that illusion alive means rehearsing, repairing, and, yes, dealing with hecklers. Because Elizabethan audiences didn't politely clap and sip wine. They were rowdy, loud, brutally honest. If a performance bored them, they let you know. With their mouths, their feet, and sometimes their lunch. You pass by a bucket filled with discarded fruit, and there it is again, the tomato, still firm, still terrifying. Tomatoes in this era weren't the juicy salad staples you know. In fact, many people thought they were poisonous, and they sort of were, when eaten off pewter plates, which leach led into the acidic fruit. Elizabethans called them love apples, which is misleading because nothing says romance like gastrointestinal distress. Fringe tidbit: some scholars think the tomato's bad reputation helped it earn a spot in the hands of angry theatergoers. A fruit nobody liked, already considered sketchy, perfect for launching at an actor who flubbed his monologue. Of course, historians still argue whether tomatoes were actually thrown, or if this is a later embellishment. Some say rotten apples and cabbages were more common. Others suggest the tomato-throwing image was born in 19th century America and retroactively applied to Shakespeare's time because, well, it's funnier that way. Still, when you stand on the stage and look out at those empty benches, it's easy to imagine the air thick with squashed produce. The pit or yard where the groundling stood was a boiling sea of humanity. These weren't wealthy nobles in padded seats. They were working-class Londoners who paid a penny to stand in the open, no roof overhead, no seats beneath their feet. Rain or shine, they shouted, laughed, jeered, and occasionally threw things. You picture it now. A hapless actor sweating through his lines, one eye twitching as the crowd grows restless. Someone coughs dramatically. Someone else begins chanting, "Bring back the bear baiting." And then, it happens. A tomato arcs through the air like a crimson comet, splatters on the stage, and triggers a wave of chaos. Lines are forgotten. Someone slips. The audience erupts. Backstage, actors huddle, debating whether to continue or abandon ship. A few brave souls re-enter with improvised dialogue, hoping humor will defuse the moment. Sometimes it worked. Other times, well, that's what the exit trapdoor was for. And let's talk about bear baiting for a second. Yes, that was a real competitor to the theater. Just down the river, you could watch chained bears fight dogs for public entertainment. It was loud, messy, and unfortunately, wildly popular. Theater had to be just as thrilling, minus the animal cruelty, plus a dash of iambic pentameter. So the actors leaned in. They shouted louder. They fought dirtier. Sword fights became more elaborate, monologues more impassioned, And yes, sometimes blood capsules were used for extra flair, though back then, capsule probably meant a scrap of pig's bladder filled with red dye and optimism. You spot one such relic near the trapdoor. Cracked open, long dried out. Maybe it was used last night in Julius Caesar. Or maybe someone just really hates pigs. Hard to say. The stagecraft wasn't perfect, but it had heart. Rope pulleys lifted actors to simulate flying. Trapdoors allowed ghosts to rise from the underworld. Thunder was made with rolling cannonballs, lightning with flashes of powdered resin. And somehow it worked. The audience gasped, shrieked, even applauded, though never politely. You remember a trick one actor swore by, stuffing his double with dried lavender to counter the stench. Not for himself, of course, but to make being stabbed by him slightly more pleasant for his co-stars. It's the little things. By midday, the stage buzzes again. Rehearsals start. A group of boys practice their death scenes with alarming enthusiasm. A seasoned actor tries to teach a newcomer how to die big without flailing like a distressed duck. You take it all in, wondering if tomorrow's crowd will be kinder. Probably not, but the troupe keeps preparing. Because what else is there to do? This is life now. Tomatoes or no tomatoes. You adapt, you survive, and if you're lucky, you get to wear the good wig. You linger just behind the curtain as the afternoon sun slants across the stage, and the room hums with a mix of nerves, sweat, and the faint notes of badly tuned lute. Your cue is coming soon, but you're not focused on the lines. Not yet. You're thinking about the crowd outside, already gathering. Shoeless boys, toothless old men, and women holding baskets of something fishy and untrustworthy. Each of them clutching a coin and an expectation. Performing for an Elizabethan audience is like walking a tightrope while someone juggles knives beneath you. The groundlings, those rowdy stand-up viewers packed into the pit, were the real litmus test of your worth. They didn't care for subtlety or nuance. They wanted drama, volume, and spectacle. Bonus points if someone died on stage. Double bonus if two people did. You peek through the curtain and catch sight of the first tomato of the evening. It's sitting in a grubby hand, cradled like a weaponized apple. You can't decide if it's fresher than usual or just more evil-looking. It gleams with menace. It's entirely possible that it's not from this season, which only makes it worse. Still, the fear of fruit wasn't what drove you, it was a thrill. The theater pulsed with energy. From the moment the doors opened, chaos ruled. Vendors sold beer and nuts, sometimes walking right through a scene. Pickpockets slinked among the crowd. Children wailed, dogs barked, and someone in the back always smelled like goat. And yet, here's the kicker, it worked. Somehow, against all logic, the stories broke through. When you stepped on stage, that frantic, fruit-filled crowd quieted. Not completely. There was always a baby crying somewhere, but enough for the words to land. Historians still argue whether Shakespeare actually wrote all the plays attributed to him, but no one debates the effect his stories had. The language, crude and poetic, sacred and ridiculous, grabbed people by the collar and pulled them in. Even the fishmonger chewing pickled herring in the front row got misty-eyed when Juliet fell. But back to you. Your costume smells like someone stored it in a chimney, and your tights are definitely on backwards. Doesn't matter. The show's about to begin, and that means adrenaline. You pace once, twice, then hear it, your line. You burst on stage, project from your diaphragm or what's left of it, and hope the crowd doesn't hate you immediately. They don't. Not yet. Anyway, you hit your marks. You over-enunciate just enough to be understood over the din. You exaggerate your gestures like you're narrating to a crowd halfway to Scotland. And it works. You get a chuckle, a gasp, a smattering of applause. You're safe, until you fumble a line. Just one word, barely a stammer. But the mood shifts. A groundling yells something impolite involving sheep. You try to recover, but someone else joins in. The heckling grows teeth. And then, splat, the tomato lands. Not on you, thank heavens, but near enough to make a statement. You stay in character, pretending it was part of the scene. You even give a theatrical glance, as if surprised by divine fruit. It earns a laugh. You're back in control. Fringe tidbit? Some actors practice splat dodging, sidestepping fruit midline, like it was part of choreography. One legend claims a performer once caught a tomato midair and incorporated it into a soliloquy on fate. Historians still argue whether it happened or was just a piece of traveling theater gossip with legs and flair. Backstage later, you're cleaning tomato pulp from your doublet with the sleeve of someone else's costume when the others gather to discuss the show. It's part critique session, part therapy. Everyone has an opinion, including the lute player who showed up halfway through the second act and insists the rhythm was off. The director, a barrel-chested man with a voice like gravel and mead, gives you a nod. Not bad, he grunts, which is high praise in this world. You survived. No one threw a turnip, and your wig stayed on. Victories, all. Tomorrow's show will be different. A new crowd. A new chance to dodge shame and produce. You'll rinse your costume in a river, scrub the stains with vinegar, and pretend the mildew smell is authentic. You think about the actors who didn't make it. The ones who cracked under the heckling or left after one too many rotten egg showers. There's a story about a guy who was pelted so badly during taming of the shrew that he became a monk. Another supposedly faked his death just to escape his contract. You also think about the audience, how they keep coming, no matter the weather or the threat of plague. They crave this strange, sweaty spectacle just as much as you do. There's something communal in it. The laughter, the gasps, the occasional projectile. For all its messiness, it binds you. You plop onto a splintered bench, rubbing your temples. The lute player has started improvising a tragic ballad about spoiled vegetables. It's not great, but you let it wash over you. Outside, the sky darkens. The city simmers. Tomorrow, you'll take the stage again, with your lines memorized and your dodging skills honed. You'll face the crowd, the chaos, and the tomatoes with all the courage of a barely paid, half-trained actor in itchy wool. And you know what? You'll probably enjoy it. You wake up sore, not from a scuffle or heroic battle scene, but from crouching behind a crate mid-performance. Try to avoid both your cue and a suspiciously overripe onion. Your back aches, your knees crack, and your throat feels like you gargled sawdust. Still, there's no time for self-pity. Morning means rehearsal. And rehearsal means dodging the wrath of your director and the occasional goose that wanders in from the street. As you drag yourself toward the theater, stepping over slush, dung, and something that may have once been a pie, your thoughts drift to the ever-evolving art of Elizabethan stagecraft. Contrary to what modern romantics might imagine, this was not a golden age of poised, dignified artistry. This was theater on the edge, cobbled together with spit, string, and stubborn ambition. At the heart of it all, the globe, your slightly splintered home away from home. Its open-air structure creaks with every gust of wind, and the roof, what little of it exists, offers no protection from rain or rogue bird droppings. But to you, it's glorious. The tech crew, if you can call them that, is already bustling. Pulleys squeal. Ropes fray. Someone is testing a thunder machine, which mostly sounds like a barrel of rocks getting kicked down a stairwell. Special effects, Elizabethan style, are delightfully chaotic. For storm scenes, they roll cannonballs. For lightning, they flash torches. And for fire, well, it's exactly what it sounds like. Actors occasionally lose eyebrows. It's part of the charm. Today's scene involves a bit of stage magic. That is, a trapdoor and a lot of praying. You're playing a ghost who must rise dramatically from a floor. The trapdoor, built by a carpenter who may or may not believe in measuring tapes, sticks halfway. You spend 10 minutes awkwardly halfway risen, like a baked loaf that never finished rising. One of the musicians offers you a push. It's not graceful, but the scene lives. The costumes are another performance altogether. They're heavy, layered, and almost certainly cursed. You got corsets cinched tighter than a taxman's purse, hose edged like betrayal, and wigs infested with lice whose lineage can be traced back to Henry VIII. But they matter. When you step into costume, you step into character. Even if that character is sweating profusely and may pass out before intermission. One quirky detail. Not everyone knows. Some actors, especially the veterans, hid small flasks or snacks within their sleeves. There's a rumor that one actor got caught mid-soliloquy with chicken leg in hand. Historians still argue whether he was simply hungry or making an early statement on surrealist theater. And then there's makeup. If you're playing a noble, your face is caked in white lead powder, a decision that slowly poisons you over time. Peasants? Dirt rubbed on with real dirt. If you're lucky, someone might have actual soot. Rouge comes from crushed flowers or animal fat tinted with berries. The result is less stage-ready and more local haunted doll auction. Rehearsals are punctuated by chaos. A drunk costumer wanders through, insisting Hamlet should wear a feather boa. A local nobleman stops by to observe, which means criticize everything and threaten pull funding unless his niece gets a speaking role. She does. She cannot act. No one tells her. Then there's the plague. Always the plague. It hangs over you like bad foreshadowing. The theaters close at the first sign of outbreak, and actors scatter. Some join traveling troops. Others beg for work. You, of course, try to ride it out. There's always that superstition. Actors don't die during plagues. They just take longer intermissions. Superstition runs deep backstage. The word Macbeth is forbidden unless it's part of the script, and even then it's whispered. You knock on wood. You spit over shoulders. You wear the same lucky socks until they're more sock essence than fabric. Someone swears the ghost of former actor haunts the rafters, and once saved a show by pushing a falling curtain back into place. Historians still argue whether it was a ghost, a raccoon, or a drunk apprentice. Still, the rehearsal must go on. You practice your death scene 3 times, each with increasing melodrama. By the end, you collapse so convincingly that 2 apprentices attempt to revive you with brandy and slaps. You call that a win. Lunch is a crust of bread and maybe some cheese. If you're lucky, one guy has a sausage. You eye it with longing and possibly resentment. Food, like fame, is unevenly distributed in the theater world. Afternoon brings blocking, the choreography of your movements. The director has decided your character should twirl dramatically upon hearing bad news. You attempt it. You spin. You trip over a broom and fall directly into a barrel labeled props, miscellaneous tragedy. You emerge with fake blood and a broken lute string stuck to your forehead. Still, you try again. The twirl lands. The director claps once and mutters, passable. You beam. By sunset, the theater empties. You linger, brushing fake dirt from your costume and watching the pigeons roost in the thatch above. The air cools. London exhales. You think about the audience again. Those faces in the pit, rowdy and real. You picture the fancier boxes above, where nobles sip wine, and pretend not to laugh at fart jokes. You imagine tomorrow night, when the play opens for real, the adrenaline, the applause, the possibility of a tomato to the temple. And yet, there's nowhere you'd rather be. It's not glamorous. It's not safe, but it's yours. So, you gather your script, your sweat-stained tunic, and your rapidly crumbling dignity. You step into the night, under flickering lanterns and over cobblestones that try to twist your ankles. And you think, maybe tomorrow, just maybe, Noah will throw produce. The next morning hits like a hangover you didn't earn. You shuffle into daylight with a head full of lines, half-remembered cues, and the slight dread of opening night. The sun is barely up, but London's already loud. Market carts rumble down muddy streets. Dogs bark at invisible enemies. And someone shouting about fresh eels like they're concert tickets. You make your way toward the globe again, step slower than usual, because tonight's the big one. And big means potential glory, or one heck of a rotten vegetable facial. In Elizabethan theater, audience approval is not a passive affair. They cheer, they jeer, they throw things, especially at you, if you flub a line, forget your blocking, or wear a hat they find morally offensive. That's where the tomatoes come in. Technically, tomatoes shouldn't even be here yet. Brought over from the Americas in the mid-1500s, they're still widely feared by the English, who suspect the fruit of being poisonous, especially the upper classes. But the groundlings? Those penny-paying, sweat-soaked masses who stand closest to stage? Let's just say they're not above lobbing a squishy red missile if your monologue drags. Historians still argue whether any actor was ever knocked cold by a tomato or if that's just Victorian embellishment. But the fear feels real enough when you're facing 1,000 judgmental faces and a few suspiciously full baskets. You arrive backstage and nod to your fellow castmates. There's Reginald, always slightly too enthusiastic about sword fights. Margaret, who never forgets a line but once threw up mid-curtsy. And Thomas, sweet, forgetful Thomas, who's currently wearing his costume backwards and doesn't know it. He'll figure it out by intermission. Maybe. The mood backstage is electric, and not in the calming spa candle kind of way. It's tension with a side of cold sweat. Someone's chanting a prayer to muses. Someone else is muttering threats at their wig. And the director is pacing so hard you're surprised he hasn't dug a trench in the dirt. You take your spot in the wings. The curtain rises. The show begins. Your cue comes fast. You step onto the stage, blinded momentarily by afternoon sunlight and the gleam of many, many eyes. You speak your first line, too loud maybe, but it gets a chuckle. Encourage, you move on. The play unfolds with surprising smoothness, despite the fact that half your props were built from scrap, and your fellow actor just dropped a goblet that now rolls lazily across the floor. Somewhere in the third act, a dog barks from the pit. No one knows where it came from. It's not in the script. You consider improvising. Alas, poor Yorkie, I knew him, Horatio. But you don't. You just keep going. And then, mid-monologue, just when you're reaching emotional crescendo, it happens. A projectile sails from the audience. You flinch. It misses. But it's a tomato. Definitely a tomato. The smell confirms it. You pause for half a second too long. The audience notices. You recover with a bow, a smile, and a joke. Next time, aim for the mouth. I skipped lunch. The crowd laughs. You survive. Behind the scenes, there's applause and relief. The tomato didn't land. The audience stayed till the end. And the nobles didn't storm out in moral outrage. That's what you call a win. After curtain call, you strip out of your costume like it's a burning building. Your limbs ache, your throat's raw, and you're 90% sure the tomato juice soaked through your tunic. Still, there's pride. The kind you only feel when you survive something mildly traumatic, but weirdly rewarding. Later, over ale at the nearby tavern, the cast rehashes every moment. Reginald swears he blocked a thrown onion with his sword. Margaret is convinced the Queen's cousin was in the audience and wept during her speech. Thomas finally realizes his tunic was inside out. No one corrects him. Talk turns to tomatoes again. It always does. There's an ongoing wager about who will get hit first this season. So far, it's a tie between you and a guy named Edwin who walked on stage with spinach in his teeth. Someone even keeps a tally scratched into the dressing room wall. Your name's there, once. You nurse your drink and wonder how a fruit from faraway lands became the bane of English theater. Theories abound. Some say tomatoes were seen as foreign and suspicious, much like bad accents. Others think it's just that they're easy to throw and satisfying to splatter. Historians still argue whether audiences threw them as jokes or as genuine critiques, but one thing's clear. Elizabethan theater was as much a contact sport as it was an art form. You leave the tavern under a moonlit sky, the air cool and damp. A group of actors passes you, laughing too loudly, balancing their props like circus performers. You smile. There's something timeless about it all. The chaos, the passion, the constant fear of flying fruit. You reach your small rented room above a tanner's shop. It smells vaguely of leather and lost dreams. You collapse into bed, still in partial costume, and think, tomorrow, maybe I'll be the one with a chicken leg in his sleeve. And as sleep creeps in, you dream of applause and squishy vegetables, of ghosts rising from stuck trapdoors, and of audiences who love you, at least enough to throw only one tomato at a time. The next day begins the same way all days begin when you're part of theatrical guild in Elizabethan London, with a splitting headache, stale bread, and a faint suspicion that someone stole your only clean pair of stockings. You stretch, yawn, and discover a suspicious red stain on your collar from last night's airborne tomato incident. A badge of honor, you decide, or at least an oddly fragrant souvenir. Today is not performance day, which sounds restful, but in truth, it's worse. It's rehearsal day, which means reciting lines you already know while dodging set carpenters, avoiding the director's wrath, and trying not to trip over the prop cauldron for the third time this week. You trudge toward the theater, stomach grumbling, and vow to avoid eye contact with anyone who smells like creative feedback. The globe looms ahead, circular and majestic in that rickety wood and hay kind of way. You enter through the stage door and immediately regret it. The inside smells like warm sweat, damp wood, and fear. Costume pieces are draped over benches. Someone's dog is sleeping on a prop bed. The director is shouting something about emotional authenticity while dressed as a pirate king. Just another Thursday. Rehearsal begins, and it's a mess. Reginald forgets his cue and then blames the ghost of Richard III for distracting him. Margaret insists her character needs a pet owl for motivation. Thomas, bless him, tries to do both his lines and yours simultaneously, and ends up inventing a new character named Marthamas. The director weeps into a handkerchief that is, unfortunately, someone's cape. As you walk through your scenes, your feet follow the patterns you've traced 100 times, but your mind drifts. You think about the oddness of it all, of acting in a time when the stage is your only microphone and half your audience is drunk. You reflect on how the theater is a social equalizer. Nobles sit on cushions and boxes. The poor crowd around the stage, elbow to elbow. But for 2 hours, everyone listens to the same jokes, gasps at the same sore fights, and judges the same mispronounced iambic pentameter. One of your lines lands poorly. The director stops everything. Try it again, he says, but this time, mean it like your life depends on it. Like you just found out your fiancé is marrying your cousin, and your favorite horse has a plague. You nod solemnly, as if that makes sense, and repeat the line with as much emotional horse plague energy as you can muster. The director claps. Success. For now. Later, during a break, you and the others gather in a circle on the ground, chewing cold meat pies and comparing bruises. There's a long-standing debate about whether tomatoes are the worst thing to be hit with. Some say yes. Others argue for cabbages, which have more heft. One actor swears he once got nailed with a wheel of soft cheese, and no one knows if he's joking. Tomatoes still reign supreme, though, because they're not just messy, they're personal. They stain your costume, your dignity, and sometimes your socks. Historians still argue whether the fear of tomatoes ever reached the point of superstition, but there are rumors of actors sewing tiny cloves of garlic into their sleeve for luck or whispering lines backward to ward off misfortune. Margaret shares a story about a production in which an entire row of spectators pelted the lead actor with garden vegetables because he wore the wrong color hose. Bright orange, apparently, a shade associated with political rebellion. No one's really sure if that's accurate or just gossip passed down by costumers with grudges. But either way, it ends with a beetroot to the face. The sun climbs higher. Rehearsal drags. You run the final scene 3 times in a row, each time with different blocking. Once with a stool, once without a stool, once with a stool that breaks mid-monologue and leaves you sprawled dramatically on the floor, muttering, "Alas!" You're applauded for realism. You suspect it's sarcasm. Eventually, you're dismissed, not because rehearsal is done, but because the director has lost his voice from shouting and someone accidentally set the prop tablecloth on fire. Everyone scatters. You step outside, blinking in the late afternoon light, and head toward the marketplace. You need fabric thread, maybe a new belt, and, if you're honest, a distraction. The market is buzzing. Stall keepers hawk everything from duck eggs to dubious love potions. Children chase each other around piles of turnips. And yes, there they are, baskets of plump, red tomatoes, glistening in the sun like little edible warnings. You stare at them, half daring them to leap into your hands. They look innocent enough, but you know their true purpose. You wonder if the vendors realize their wares are theatrical weapons. Some probably do. One even sells his tomatoes by weight and by squishability. He gives you a wink when you walk by. You pretend not to see. You return home with a bag of bread, a threadbare cloak, and a single tomato, not for throwing, for eating. Maybe. You sit on your windowsill and watch the sun sink behind the thatched rooftops, painting the city gold and red. It's oddly peaceful, this little pocket of quiet between rehearsals and chaos. You take a bite of the tomato. It's tart, juicy, a little too ripe. It drips down your chin. You laugh to yourself, thinking how it might have felt to be hit by this very tomato. Then you wipe your face and settle in for the evening. Tomorrow there's another show, another crowd, another chance to dodge flying fruit and win reluctant applause. But for now, your bed waits. Your tunic is drying by the fire, and your dreams, when they come, are full of spotlights and soliloquies, and just maybe a very slow-motion tomato arcing toward you like fate wrapped in red skin. You wake the next morning to the sound of someone shouting about eels. It's unclear whether it's a merchant, a neighbor, or just someone with extremely passionate feelings about slippery seafood. Either way, it's your cue to start the day. You sit up, scratch your head, and glance toward the windowsill. The tomato is gone. For a half second, you wonder if it crawled off by itself in protest. But no, your roommate must have eaten it, or used it for target practice. The air smells like ash and fresh bread, always a slightly confusing combination. Outside, the street hums with life. Cartwheels rumble over cobblestones. A pig snuffles along an alley. A man in a double argues with a boy selling roasted chestnuts. The usual. Today is performance day, which means you must transform, again, from a mildly underpaid mortal into a glorious theatrical demigod, or at least a well-gesturing side character with 2 monologues and a fake mustache. You grab your costume bundle and trudge toward the theater, stomach fluttering slightly. No matter how many times you do this, the nerves are always waiting, curled up like a cat in your gut. At the Globe, things are already chaotic. A costumer's been stabbed by a sewing needle, thank goodness. A stagehand is in tears over a missing prop chicken, and Reginald is arguing with the director about whether his character would realistically weep while juggling a skull. You keep your head down and start getting dressed, layer by layer, into someone else's life. Your costume smells like lavender and stale sweat, an oddly comforting blend. You smear some charcoal under your eyes for dramatic effect, and tuck a ribbon into your sleeve for luck. Not because you're superstitious. Of course. Just tradition. Backstage is a flurry of whispered lines, snapping fans, and last-minute blocking changes. Someone forgot their shoes. Someone else brought their dog, who has now decided to nap center stage. The director claps his hands, calls for quiet, and then announces in a suspiciously calm voice that tonight's audience includes a minor noble and a known tomato enthusiast. Everyone goes quiet. You peek through the curtain. The crowd is huge, shoulder to shoulder, buzzing like bees in a barrel. You can't hear individual voices, only the collective hum of anticipation, occasional laughter, and the soft thunk of someone dropping a bottle. The noble is easy to spot. Fine clothes, feathered hat, the faint aura of someone who thinks toilets are for other people. Beside him, a basket of tomatoes sits on a servant's lap like a coiled thread. Your cue arrives faster than expected. You step onto the stage. The lights, such as they are, sunbeams angling to the open roof, hit you square in the face. You squint. You breathe. You begin. The first lines go well. The crowd chuckles. You don't fall. Reginald hits his mark. Margaret nails her line. You almost start to enjoy yourself. Then, during the second act, someone sneezes violently in the front row, startling a pigeon, which takes off and flaps directly across the stage. You dodge it mid-soliloquy without breaking character. The audience applauds. You bow. It might be the high point of your career. Later, just before your final scene, you glance at the noble. His servant is holding a tomato now. It gleams in the sun, fat and red and ominous. Your throat goes dry. You finish your speech anyway. You hold your posture, voice steady, heart racing. The tomato does not fly. Instead, the noble claps, politely, disinterestedly. The servant sets the tomato down. You exhale so hard it whistles. Backstage, you're a mix of elation and exhaustion. The play is over. The audience disperses. No tomatoes were thrown, which technically counts as a standing ovation in your world. Someone hands out honeyed figs. Someone else sings off-key. The director looks like he might cry. Again, you leave the theater as the sun sinks low, casting everything in a golden haze. The streets are quieter now, the air cooler. You pass a group of children playing with wooden swords. One of them recites a line from play. Badly. You grin. On your way home, you stop by the tavern. Inside, the walls are covered with strange artifacts, old playbills, discarded props, even a melted wax mask of some long-forgotten villain. The barkeep knows you. He pours you something warm, something sweet. You sit in the corner and listen to chatter. Actors, merchants, musicians, all mingling, all exaggerating. Someone brings up tomatoes again. It's always tomatoes. This time, it's a conspiracy theory. One actor swears that tomatoes are secretly cultivated by disgruntled playwrights as revenge against bad performances. Another claims the fruit was banned for 10 years after a particularly disastrous production of Titus Andronicus. No one can confirm. Historians still argue whether there was ever any official rule about fruit in theater, but the stories live on. You sip your drink. Your eyes grow heavy. You leave the tavern with a belly full of warmth and a brain full of half-remembered sonnets. The walk home is short, the air tinged with smoke and dew. A cat weaves between your legs. You step around a puddle, then pause. There's a tomato sitting neatly in the middle of the street, alone, unbitten, unthrown. You stare at it. It stares back. Or it would if it had eyes. You laugh softly, shake your head, and walk on. Back in your room, you collapse onto your straw-filled mattress. Your costume is in a heap. Your candle flickers low. The city hums around you, a living thing. And as your eyelids droop, you dream not of applause or fame, or even nobles with questionable fruit baskets, but of standing under the open sky, words flowing from your mouth, and knowing, somehow, that for a moment, everyone was listening. You wake up to the distant clatter of a market opening. The smell of fresh bread weaving through the cracks of your window. The tomato from last night's eerie street encounter has vanished. No sign left but a faint squish on the cobblestones. You rub your eyes, trying to remember if it was a dream or some secret message from the theater gods. Maybe it was both. Today, you're not just an actor. You're a courier of gossip, an informal reporter of the theater's strange ecosystem. Word has a new play is arriving, one that's supposedly so controversial it's already been banned in 2 boroughs. Naturally, this makes it the talk of the town, because who doesn't love a good scandal? And tomatoes? Well, they're always involved somehow. On your way to the Globe, you pass the usual suspects. The baker's apprentice is flipping dough with the flair of a juggler. The cobbler is fixing shoes with an intensity that suggests a personal vendetta against Saul's. And the town crier is loudly announcing the latest scandal involving a runaway goose and a stolen loot. You pause, half expecting the goose to waddle by. But it's nowhere in sight. Inside the theater, the atmosphere is electric. The new play is The Fruit of Wrath, and as the title suggests, it involves a lot of angry characters and a suspicious number of tomatoes. The playwright, a sharp-tongued woman named Isabel, has promised a spectacle unlike anything the Elizabethan stage has seen. Some say it a political jab, others whisper it a metaphor for something deeper. Historians still argue whether the fruit is meant literally or figuratively, but the debate only adds fuel to the theatrical fire. You catch a glimpse of Isabel backstage. She's fierce, with eyes like a carved stone and a smile that's part challenge, part warning. She hands you a small bundle of scripts, thick with ink and passion. Your task: memorize your lines quickly and try not to get hit by any flying tomatoes during rehearsal. The first reading is chaotic. Actors stumble over their lines. Props go missing, and at one point, someone accidentally throws a real tomato instead of the prop kind. The room smells like vinegar and desperation. Yet, there's something thrilling in the madness, a raw energy that promises the play will be unforgettable. Lunch is a quiet affair, shared with a few fellow actors who swap stories about their worst tomato encounters. One recalls a night when a well-aimed tomato nearly knocked over the lead actor's wig, causing an improvised monologue about baldness and betrayal. Another swears that tomatoes carry bad luck, unless blessed by the theater's resident jester, a role currently filled by a lanky man with a questionable sense of humor. After eating, You wander to a nearby market stall selling fruits and vegetables. The vendor, an older woman with sharp eyes, notices your interest in the tomatoes and leans in conspiratorially. You know, she says, these weren't always feared on stage. They came from a new world and were first thought to be poisonous. Actors avoided them not because they feared being hit, but because eating one could, supposedly, kill you. You chuckle, imagining a tomato as a silent assassin in a comedy of errors. Back at the theater, rehearsal continues under a heavy sky. The actors practice throwing tomatoes with exaggerated care, as if handling delicate treasure rather than squishy fruit. The director fusses over timing, lighting, and the precise moment when the tomatoes should start flying. It's an oddly elegant dance of chaos, a carefully controlled storm. As evening falls, you sit outside the theater, watching the city lights flicker on one by one. The sounds of day fade into a gentle murmur, horses clopping, distant laughter, the occasional shout of a night watchman. You think about the strange relationship Elizabethan actors have with tomatoes, symbols of scorn, tools of rebellion, and, oddly enough, a kind of camaraderie. You sip a small cup of spice cider and wonder what it must have felt like, standing on those rickety wooden stages, words flowing, tomatoes flying, the audience's eyes gleaming with delight or disdain. You're part of that story now, awkward, scrappy, sometimes terrified, but always ready to face the next curtain. Historians still argue whether the tomatoes' theatrical role was more about actual audience disdain or a cleverly staged addition to entertain and engage the crowd. Whatever the truth, the tomatoes' place in Elizabethan theater remains a fascinating mix of fact and folklore, much like the plays themselves. You feel your eyelids droop. The cider's warmth spreads through your limbs like a gentle tide. Tomorrow brings another performance, another chance to dodge flying fruit and capture fleeting moments of magic. For now, though, you close your eyes, letting the city's heartbeat lull you to sleep. You wake up to a gray, drizzly morning, the kind that wraps the city in a damp blanket and muffles the usual raucous sounds of London. It's the perfect weather to stay inside and ponder why anyone thought it was a good idea to throw rotten fruit at actors. Still, the theater calls. You trudge through puddles on your way to the playhouse, your boots squelching with every step. Inside, the scent of damp wood and spilled ale greets you. The rehearsals for Fruit of Wrath are heating up, and so is the tension. Today, the actors are practicing their most precarious scene, a mock brawl involving, you guessed it, a barrage of tomatoes. You watch as one particularly enthusiastic player takes aim and sends a tomato flying. Not at a fellow actor, but straight into the face of the stage manager. A hush falls over the room, followed by nervous laughter. You remember reading that Elizabethan actors were not only wary of tomatoes, but also of other fruits like apples and pears. Apparently, these fruit attacks were an early form of audience participation, less polite than a round of applause, but more effective at getting a point across. The audience could be brutal, especially if the play was a flop. The idea of someone tossing fruit might sound ridiculous now, but back then, it was a genuine threat to your dignity and maybe even your nose. Historians still argue whether tomatoes were the primary projectile or the fear extended more broadly to any soft, squishy fruit. Some records suggest apples were just as feared, especially when rotten and suitably squishy. You imagine the chaos, a rain of fruit pelting the stage while the actors desperately try to carry on. It's a wonder anyone ever made it through a performance without a bruised ego or a bruised cheek. The playwright, Isabel, is in a rare mood today. She insists that the tomatoes be more than just props. They're symbols of rebellion, fury, and the unpredictability of life. She even suggests that the actors eat a tomato before going on stage to embrace the enemy, a suggestion met with a mixture of horror and reluctant curiosity. You decide to try one, peeling back the smooth skin to reveal the glistening flesh beneath. The taste is oddly sweet, with just a hint of acidity, nothing like the poison some feared. You wonder how a fruit so reviled on stage became a staple in kitchens around the world centuries later. Maybe it was all a big misunderstanding, like the time someone tried to convince people that bathing was bad for your health. Spoiler alert, it wasn't, during a break. You overhear a debate about whether the tradition of throwing tomatoes originated as a form of protest against unpopular plays, or if it was a kind of crowdsourced improv. Did the audience actually influence the play's direction by their choice of fruit? Historians still argue, with some saying it was audience feedback at its most literal, while others think it was just unruly hooliganism. Later, you notice a few actors wearing little leather pouches at their waists. Secret tomato catchers, a clever invention to avoid painful hits. It's funny how necessity breeds innovation, even in the world of 16th century theater. As the day wears on, you feel the familiar mix of excitement and dread. Performing in front of a live audience is nerve-wracking enough without the threat of flying produce. Still, there's something intoxicating about this chaotic dance. This interplay of script, actor, and audience that makes every night unforgettable. Outside, the rain starts again, gentle at first, then steady. You imagine the tomatoes outside, slowly turning mushy in the wet market stalls, waiting for their moment on the stage, or more likely, on the ground. You sip your cider again, a little cooler now, but still comforting. You think about the strange journey of the tomato, from feared fruit to theatrical weapon, to beloved food. It's a story full of contradictions and surprises, much like the plays you help bring to life. Your eyelids grow heavy as the rain taps a soft rhythm against the windows. Tomorrow will bring more rehearsals, more flying tomatoes, and more stories to tell. For now, you surrender to the gentle pull of sleep.